After a moment, only father and he remained in the room. He sitting in his chair at the edge of the room, father leaning against the pensive, looking far older than Sirius had ever seen him. After a minute, realizing that he hadn't left, father looked over at him. "What is it, son?" Sirius pursed his lips. He didn't want to ask, but may I see? His father looked at him warily. This is not pleasant to watch, son. Your cousin was forever changed by what she saw. Are you sure you want to? This is for the house, correct? Sirius replied. Father shook his head. Son, one day you will learn that there are wizards. And there are wizards that are head and shoulders above their peers, wizards of such power and subtlety that the rest of us pale by comparison. Albus Dumbledore is one such wizard. That man holds the power he does because of the power he holds within himself. From what I have heard from Bellatrix, this Lord Voldemort, no doubt a pretender, is similarly powerful. He brushed his hand along the pensieve. The wizard here is of the same mould. He chewed up the best of your cousin's generation within seconds, ripping them apart without much effort. He raised an eyebrow. Despite all this, are you sure you want to see? Sirius looked at his father. He was a black. Blacks showed no fear. He gulped and nodded. Father smiled gently. You'll make a great lord one day. He moved aside to allow Sirius access. I'll be waiting when you come back out. Sirius stepped up to the pensieve and looked into the imposing silvery liquid. He couldn't turn back now. Father expected him to do this. He couldn't delay it any more. He took a deep breath and dove in. What? Voldemort could only repeat the question as he stared back at the man in front of him, incredulous as he struggled to even comprehend Avery's words. The blacks have acknowledged your offer, my lord, Avery reminded him quickly, and even thanked you for it, but they accepted that the divorcing will be fully. They have declared neutrality, my lord. Neutrality, Voldemort repeated. His eyes narrowed into dark slits as he hissed his words. They dare! They are the blacks, my lord, Avery quickly reminded him. They have stated they will give no aid towards any side. They will only act if acted upon. Voldemort hissed in rage, and Avery was banished into the wall with a gesture from his wand. So not only has your incompetence cost us some of our most promising recruits, but also the support of House Black. Avery struggled to breathe as his head swam from the pain. Have said they will leave us what they have already donated, but to expect no more. You think that this lack of support means anything less than opposition? Voldemort growled as he paced, his robes billowing around him like the surface of an ocean. Writhing in storm, how many know of this? Of the black? None, my lord, Avery said quickly, desperation and assurance filling his voice. It was a discreet meeting, and that will last how long? Voldemort wondered out loud as he glared out into the distance, his fingers visibly tightening upon his wand. My lord, please! Avery begged down upon his knees. If we declare ourselves against the blacks, we will have open rebellion among our ranks. For a moment he sneered, glaring down at Avery as if he was nothing but an insignificant bug, before he calmly forced his features back to stoic neutrality. For now, what other news is there? Lester Moody has discovered our raids, Avery said with a wince, as Voldemort's face twisted in anger again at this latest revelation. And we believe he has informed Albus Dumbledore of his discovery, crawling to our dear headmaster and hoping he'll save them. Voldemort stated with a sneer and a look of disgust. Fools. And we have reports that individual struck again last night, Avery stated with a wince. Voldemort's eyes again flashed, before he gave Avery a flat look. I believe I made myself abundantly clear that there were to be no more dependent actions. This wasn't one, my lord, Avery stated quickly. The reports are he killed Fenrir Greyback last night. This time there was no immediate reaction as Voldemort processed the information, before he recalled what the state of the full moon had been, like the night before. On a full moon? Yes, my lord, Avery agreed, before hesitating and continuing in a much softer voice, without fire or silver. That made Voldemort still, then purse his lips and consider the words speculatively. Fighting a werewolf without fire or silver was generally considered the height of folly. Without something to tap into the beast's innate weaknesses, they were more than difficult to overcome. Then how damaged was this Storm Chaser? Has he been diagnosed as a werewolf yet? He was not injured, according to the report. Avery admitted in an almost deathly silent voice, his whole body trembling in terror. Voldemort stared at the man for a moment, his mind almost rebelling against the words, before snarling, "Who is he?" Avery whimpered helplessly as he prostrated himself on the ground. "The only thing we know is that he has a messy black hair, green eyes, and wears glasses." Voldemort paced in irritation. He did not like this new unknown. He did not like unknowns, period, as they made things uncertain, uncontrollable. They were more than a complication. They were a threat. How is it that we do not know who he is? We should know who every witch and wizard in the Isles is. Voldemort slipped back to his seat, and forcing himself back into the guise of the regal, knowing lord who resided imperiously over his court. Wizards of this caliber do not simply appear out of thin air. We do not know, my lord. Avery repeated that same frustrating answer with a wince as he further wilted under Voldemort's glare. I have been asking. I have been looking through everything I can. I have talked to the continent, and I have even reached out across the pond. No one seems to have even heard of someone like him. Then find out. This is my destiny. This is my time, Voldemort snarled as he dug his fingers into the arms of his chair, face distorted into an ugly mask of hatred and anger, before he suddenly held up his wand, his hand rising faster than Avery could follow. Around him, tendrils of a dark, pulsing purple miasma rose, hissing like snakes as they flashed with arcs of sickly green bolts. Then his wand flashed out, and the air seemed to scream in terror as it raced towards Avery. The man lifted his wand, attempting to shield himself, to deflect the coming spell. Anything, only to have the spell warp about his attempts at defense and strike up on his arm. Then Avery began to scream. Voldemort watched, a cold, cruel smile coiling over his lips as he could see the way the wizard's skin was slowly peeled back on his arm. Then bubbling boils formed around stretches of stinking rot. Voldemort cut off the spell and watched as each of the pustules pulsed, swelled, and then burst with a noxious pus that made Avery's skin burn everywhere it touched, all while the man began to retch and vomit up from the combination of pain and sickness. "Surely you knew this was coming, my dear Avery," Voldemort stated with a slow, almost purring voice as he seemed to examine his wand. "Or perhaps you thought it would be something simple, something direct. The Cruciatus is a very useful, even enjoyable tool, but with all my travels, all my experiences, all the dark forbidden things I know, you didn't think it was the worst I had, did you?" My lord!" Avery almost squealed out the words as he clutched at his cursed arm, his lips covered in vomit and spit, as his eyes were blinded with tears. "Please, please, mercy." "Mercy, Avery?" Voldemort asked, as if contemplating the word as he lightly tapped his chin with his wand. "Truly, do you think you have earned such? Because of you, I have lost significant footing in our plans. Because of you, we have lost the Blacks. Because of you, Dumbledore has been alerted to our preparations." Casually, he strode forward, his body moving with an almost inhuman serpentine grace. His wand found the soft spot beneath Avery's chin and forced the man's gaze up towards his own as he lightly twisted the slender wood between his fingers, digging it into the man's skin. In smooth, sibilant tones he spoke. "Mercy has never been one of my virtues, as you should well know, Avery." And with a flick of his wrist, the tip of the wand flicked away from Avery's throat, and, faster than the cursed man could follow, a simple cutting curse separated the cursed appendage from the man. As he listened to the renewed screams leaving Avery's lips, Voldemort smiled cruelly back at the man. "Disappoint me again, and I shall teach you another lesson. Find out who this storm chaser is quickly enough, and perhaps I can be convinced to grant you Charles Potter was seated in the quaint Muggle inn with a small tumbler of decent Scotch and a rather nicely done rare steak with roasted potatoes on the side. The meal itself was good enough to make the trip worthwhile in and of itself. He'd have to remember to convince Dora to step outside of her comfort zone and give it a try. Still, when he saw the man enter into the room, he didn't need the sudden stillness to tell him that this was the man he was here to see. He knew the face, at least in passing. It was close enough to himself and his family that he could see why Cygnus had declared the man a Potter. But the eyes were just as he'd been told, a vibrant shade of green he'd never quite seen before. There was little impressive about him at first glance, even less when you caught the slighter-than-average frame and the typical muggle clothing he wore. But when you looked into those eyes, there was a calm certainty in them, a look that had quickly bled into confused recognition when he met Charles's gaze and studied the man's face. Nodding back to the young man, Charles calmly gestured to the seat in front of him. For a moment it seemed as if this storm chaser might just refuse, or even simply leave. Then he walked forward and slid easily into the seat in front of him. There was a momentary silence as he allowed the man to study him, as he carefully cut another piece of the steak, and then quietly set the knife down and looked him over in closer inspection. Close enough to see the fine, mostly hidden scars that hadn't been able to be fully healed over. Close enough to see some ugly, prominent ones that were likely the work of some particularly dark curses. Close enough that it was easy for him to catch the cough, reminding him he was staring. "I do prefer to not be gawked at." It was polite, though with a tinge of irritation and sarcasm. Merely appraising, Charles responded easily enough. "What scars a man wears can tell you something of their character." "I prefer to not be appraised either," the man stated without missing a beat. "On that you will find your preferences generally disregarded," Charles pointed out as he speared the piece of steak and calmly brought it to his mouth and chewed it a few moments before swallowing. "Especially with what I'm guessing is your penchant for chasing storms." "I suppose you wouldn't believe me if I said that I have no idea what you're talking about?" Harry Potter asked as he looked back at Charles with a look of resignation on his face. "The Wilkins send their thanks for your disposal of Greyback," Charles stated simply as he lightly sopped a bit of the steak's juices on a piece of bread. It caused quite a stir. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Harry responded with a flat blandness. "Greyback managed to be freed from my spell. I never saw what happened to him after that. I'm not with the Ministry, lad," Charles pointed out, and then took a sip of his scotch before continuing. "No need to dance around the truth with me. No need to ever say anything self-incriminating either," Harry responded back with a look and an arch of the brow. A cautious wizard, Charles took another sip of the scotch. "Not exactly the most common of things these days. I grew up in the muggle world," Harry stated simply as he leaned back in the seat. "But that's why you're here, I take it, trying to find out more about me." "In part," Charles agreed with a nod. "However, there is one particular facet that matters to me in particular." "Oh!" Harry asked, a brow arching. "You're a Potter." "Am I?" Harry asked after a brief moment, his brows still raised. "Interesting. You're even aware of it," Charles noted with a slight frown as he frowned just a bit. "And yet none of us are familiar with you." "I wasn't exactly planning on advertising myself as such," Harry stated flatly. "I have enough problems to deal with without having to worry about saving you lot. You wouldn't be suggesting that we're unable to defend ourselves properly, now would you?" Charles asked with a cool tone taking over his voice. "Against most of those idiots. I wouldn't be terribly worried unless you got full of airs. Against the elites, I'd give even odds," Harry stated simply and tilted his head to the side. "Against Voldemort himself." Harry mulled that over a moment before looking flatly back at Charles. "Voldemort can go spell for spell with Dumbledore." Charles froze at that, noting the conviction in Harry's voice and frowning. "And what makes you so certain of this?" There was a pause as Harry looked at Charles for a moment, and then shrugged. "It doesn't matter." "The source of your information matters a great deal," Charles stated with a deepening frown. "The source of my information no longer exists," Harry stated with a sigh as he slumped back. "So there's no way to verify it, even if you did know of it." "You speak in vague riddles with an annoying certainty," Charles answered as he looked Harry over. "Do you really expect to be able to keep up this over-dramatic mystique?" Harry bobbed his head slightly in response. "Voldemort is a half-blood born Tom Marvolo Riddle. There's a whole anagram in his name. His mother was Merope Gaunt, and his father Tom Riddle, a muggle aristocrat whom Merope used a love potion on, and Voldemort later murdered for abandoning him." Harry tilted his head to the side a bit as he watched the slight widening of Charles's eyes before they narrowed in consideration as he continued. Despite the fact that his father never even knew about him, he framed his Uncle Morfin for the murder. I'm sure you probably heard about it. By now, Charles was trying not to gawp at Harry as he struggled to not allow his jaw to hang open and gaping. "What?" Harry asked with a slightly bemused smile. "I expect you to go ahead and verify all of this. Can't just blindly trust it after all." "How do you know all this?" Charles demanded finally. "Assuming I'm right?" Harry asked, a slight smile on his lips. "Assuming you're right," Charles allowed reluctantly. "Assuming I'm right, why would I tell a complete stranger I've never met before?" Harry challenged back. And again Charles was thrown for a loop, as the boy had seemed rather forthcoming with information, and then suddenly was being evasive. "I'm giving out information because it's rather pertinent about the man behind the people that have been trying to kill me and others," Harry made a point of stating. "You happen to likely already be included in those others." "And what exactly will lead to you trusting me?" Charles asked as he arched a brow. "Well, for starters, you could introduce yourself," Harry stated pointedly. Charles stared at the young man for a moment, resisting the urge to palm at his face at the statement. Taking a slow, deep breath, he spoke again. "I apologize. My name is Charles Potter. I happen to be the great-uncle of the woman you chose to be your messenger." "Huh?" Harry tilted his head to the side as he processed that information. "I keep forgetting Icklebella. Kynes is related to the Potters that way. I was asked by my nephew, Cygnus, to help find you." It was a neutral statement as Charles looked steadily back at Harry. "What, to deliver me up to their waiting ambush?" Harry asked sardonically. "I'm quite familiar with the blacks and their politics, even more familiar with their stance on blood purity. From what I've come to understand, to know your intentions and to declare neutrality," Charles stated as he kept his eyes on Harry. "Your little demonstration made quite the impact when the memory of it was shown." Both Cygnus and the current Lord Black Orion were apparently quite, Harry stated again, with a look that stated, "No, really, pull the other one." "They have already told the Knights of Walpurgis that they will not be granting them any additional support from what I understand," Charles stated simply before he took another sip of his drink. "It's all being kept quite hush. Hush, you know. I was only told of it for the contingency that I found you first, which you apparently have," Harry said as he shook his head. "So, the blacks are claiming neutrality. Two sides of a civil war are complicated enough for the blacks," Charles said in response. "A third becomes a bit much." "A third?" Harry asked, now visibly confused. "Why the hell would there be a third side?" "You," Charles stated simply. "Most of the veterans of the war with Grindelwald are getting on in our years. We've gotten rusty, disorganized, and have little interest in backing the Ministry in a fight. They could probably have even taken out a good number of us quickly if they struck hard and fast enough." "And what does that have to do with me?" Harry asked, still very much confused. "Because you've already made a name for yourself. Like it or not, people are going to start following your example," Charles noted shrewdly. "And power like yours will draw in people to your cause." Harry stared at Charles for a moment before sighing and slumping as he rubbed his forehead. "In for the pence, in for the pound, I suppose. Though I suppose after I did in those little dark munchers and greyback, and with the ring—" and he paused there and groaned as he palmed his head. "Bloody hell! I went well past being happy with just the bloody pound, and went for the whole bloody bank. I suppose this somehow makes sense to you." "Just realizing how bloody troublesome this has become," Harry stated before sighing softly. "I've gone and made a complete mess of things, all because of wanting one bloody drink." Charles just looked at him speculatively. "No, I'm not going to explain," Harry stated simply, and shook his head. "It would take entirely too long and involve too much convolution." "Well then," Charles stated, sensing he wasn't going to get any further with the man, "going to at least give me a name beyond some gnome dirt. Whatever you wish to call it. I don't know, I rather like it," Harry admitted with a slight smirk. "It makes me sound so much cooler than I really am." Charles simply snorted and gave the man a look. "Fine." "Fine, ruin my fun," Harry stated with a grumble and a sigh. "Harry, my name is Harry. Harry, Charles repeated, looking back at him with a brow arched. It's what my parents named me, Harry agreed with a nod and a shrug. Harry what? Charles pressed. Well, you were the one that called me a Potter, Harry countered back with a smug grin. Charles just gave him a slight glower while Harry grinned unrepentant. It wasn't too much later that Cygnus Black found himself facing an eruption of green flames from his floor as Charles' face appeared in it. Uncle Charles, Cygnus stated with a canting of his head. So good to hear from you. Nephew, Charles stated simply, his face visibly irritated. Let me through. For a moment, Cygnus considered insisting upon propriety. Then he took another look at Cygnus' face and simply opened the floor. It's open, uncle. And in a flashing pulse of flames, Charles appeared, steadying himself on his feet. He straightened up and gave Cygnus a look. I found him. Cygnus blinked at that. Already. It wasn't terribly difficult once I talked to the family he saved from Greyback, Charles stated as he slowly began to pace back and forth. He's a cheeky bastard, I'll give him that. If you can find him so easily, the knights won't likely be too far behind, Cygnus pointed out, unsure of how to feel about that. With all the extra wards the Wilkins have thrown up, there'd be plenty of warning, Charles stated simply, and shook his head. Unless one of them happens to be less thug and more of a honey-tongued charmer than I gave them credit for. Cygnus let the statement pass without challenge as he looked at Charles. Well then, uncle, we talked, Charles stated as he looked back at the floor. Or I should say I asked questions, and his answers gave me more questions than I already had before. Such as, he told me the Knight's Lord, Voldemort, I believe, is in fact a half-blood, Charles stated flatly, watching the way Cygnus's eyes almost seemed to pop out. He gave me what he claimed was his true name and the names of his parents. Do you remember the muggles that Maureen Gaunt was supposed to have murdered? No, not particularly, Cygnus admitted. Of course not, Charles muttered sourly, and then shook his head. According to your storm chaser, he was memory charmed by his nephew, who was the son of one of those muggles. Who is Voldemort? Cygnus finished staring at Charles. Supposedly, Charles agreed with a nod. Ah! We supported a half-blood, Cygnus continued, before palming his face slightly as he groaned. This! Oh, you're forgetting the best part, Charles stated with a smug, vicious grin. China stiffened at that and looked at Charles expectantly. If true, that means that all three side. All three of the most powerful are all half-bloods, Charles stated simply with a smirk. This storm chaser that Voldemort and Dumbledore, Cygnus stared at Charles, his face slowly going pale as he felt his knees going weak. But, of course, it could turn out to not be true, Charles agreed. We just need to do some research to find out, starting with Voldemort's supposed real name, Tom Marvolo Riddle. On a whim, he remembered what Harry had told him about the anagram, and casually he wrote out the name in the air between them with his wand. Then he rearranged the letters to spell Voldemort. What was left was Mayor Rydell, another bit of a flick, and he had Lord Voldemort and May left over. It was rather obvious when he then looked at Cygnus. Rather pretentious, don't you think? Cygnus stared. Yes, quite, Charles agreed with a nod. So, nephew, do you know what you're going to do now? I need a drink, Cygnus stated simply. We need a drink, Charles corrected succinctly. I was the one that had to deal with it directly from the bloody source. You just got it second-hand. Yes, Uncle Charles, Cygnus agreed woodenly with a nod of his head. And make sure it's the good stuff, won't you, lad? Charles added. Yes, Uncle Charles. Excellent.